Hey there, Transformers. Welcome to Work Transformed, the podcast that tackles the ever-evolving world of product development, project chaos, and everything in between. Each episode, we'll dive into the hottest trends, unpack the latest tools, and chat with inspiring guests who are leading the charge. So, buckle up, get ready to transform your work, and let's do this.
Hey, Transformers. Welcome to another week of your favorite podcast, Work Transformed, with your host, Jackie Bittner, and my fabulous, amazing, exceptional co-host, Thomas LeNoir.
Hello.
We are going to kick off this day by talking risky business. We're going to dive into a project management rule of law, a crucial component of project management, if you will, and that is risk management, how you calculate risks. I was thinking about it, organically as human beings, we calculate risks every moment of our lives. Don't stand too close to that ledge, you might fall. Or you teach your children about risky play. But in business, we have tools, we have templates, we have tricks for capturing all the risks related to the work that you do and taking it a step further, either seeing opportunity in those risks or figuring out how in the world you're going to mitigate them, right? Trying to find that healthy balance of what risk we're willing to live with and take for the reward or what we are not willing to sacrifice in order to get to the end.
And that's a business thing, but it's also a real life personal thing. Like anyone who's investing in the stock market, how risky do you want to be? That dictates how much you diversify your portfolio, what kind of stocks you do or don't invest in. Excuse me, this sparkling water is doing enough of it right now. When you have children, as a parent, actually, to start off on like a more relatable foot, as a parent, like risk is inherent in everything. It's like, do I take my children to the park? Yes or no? There's a risk inherently in going to the park. What if they fall and injure themselves? Like, that's risky. What if they get abducted? Like, there are because when we talk about risk, I'm jumping right in, but when we talk about risk, there is the likelihood that the risk will happen. Usually when you score your risk, you score it based on the likelihood that it'll happen and the severity of the consequence. So if it did happen, like, how bad would it be? And
True.
So, like, going to the park, there are things that are like super likely to happen, but the severity is low. Like, what if they like talk to a child and the child is sick and they get a cold? And it's like, yeah, that probably is realistically likely to happen, but like, it'll just be mildly inconvenient. If they get abducted, unlikely to happen in most cases, though it does happen, but like hugely problematic if it does. It's like, what kind of risk are you willing to take?
Oh, the abduction one just raises the level of
that's my triggering phobia when we go to the playground, because now I have 3 children. It's like, am I a good parent? Yes. Do I watch my children? Yes. But like, when you have 3 children, you as one human can only go to so many places. One's on the swing, one's on the slides, one's somewhere else. Like, could lose one or one could get taken. Like, that's my fear. I'm sorry.
But that is a super real fear. Thank you for sharing that. I have fears associated to parenting as well, but the abduction one stands out to me because with that level of risk, it sounds like there's also a heightened level of anxiety from you, which probably helps you be more alert, more aware, more laser focused on, I really don't want this really, really bad thing to happen. So here's how I'm going to mitigate the abduction risk. I'm going to, go up the slide with all 3 of my children at one time. Like, I don't know what the solution is.
That is not the mitigation strategy that I choose, but I agree with you though. And I think that's why in project management, risk identification is an early step in most projects, and it's a crucial one. Like, I've been on projects where we kind of were like, hey, the deadline's so close, we don't have time with these unnecessary tasks. We just need to jump right in and do the development. We can just jump right in and get the project started. But in doing so, you also are already inheriting the risk of what if there's something that I could have planned for at the onset that I miss. And these are really, really important things because they help you think about how to do things and what the order of events is, etc. Jackie, you look like you're really excited to say something.
I was just going to ask you a question because I think I know the answer possibly, but like, how many times during a project have things gone wrong and somebody asked the question, why didn't we identify this sooner? I mean, I feel like that happens at such a high frequency that like the argument for spending time up front is that like I don't want to get halfway through this project, because we just felt like diving in to get going and we uncover something that is so glaring. Like, let's take that time to do that risk assessment. The other thing that I wanted to say is that anxiety that you were talking about with the children at the park. Um, that is an emotion, and like in project management, we can translate like those emotions into buy-in, right? Like if we can identify risks that's going to like really derail things, people are going to feel invested before that project even starts. Like one of the last things I've done at my last company was a couple of pre-mortem exercises. So instead of a post-mortem where you look back and say, why did these things happen? You do it up front, and like you get to put on your like negativity hat and say, what are all the ways that this can go south? What are all the ways that this could go sour? And let's identify them now so that we can get ahead of them as we navigate the project.
It's interesting because I think sometimes we're nervous to do risk identification because and for those, I hate when we use terms that we just assume everyone knows. So risk identification is the process of sitting down and brainstorming. If this is what we're trying to do, and this is kind of the rough idea of how we're going to do it, here are all the things that could go wrong. And some of the risks will be within your control. Like these are things that could go wrong that we need to be mindful of. And then some of the risks can be like regulatory or compliance related things. What if the laws change? Like things that are way, way, way outside your scope, but that you need to be mindful of. So that's risk identification, identifying all the potential risks that can exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I have slightly forgotten where I was my train of thought in that.
Ooh, get on our trains.
But I think I was going to say something about, like, I think a lot of people avoid it because you're just like, now you're a naysayer. Now you're like thinking negatively, or now you're just like, looking for all the problems that could exist. But it's like, as a project manager, that's often your job. Like your job is
Yeah.
to find the problems and try to stop them before they happen. And then once they happen, to then solve them because they happen. And so it's like, you don't have the rosiest job generally already, but that's already part of it. But like, it helps so much. And to your point around gaining buy-in, I don't know why, but I'm immediately going to have all my experience working with data science teams. And if you've never worked with a data scientist, they are super analytical people who feel like, and I love them to death. I don't want this to sound negative because it is not, but because this is the nature of their job. But they are super analytical people who are like, we need to know every possible variable before we can move forward. And so working with them inherently, is a risk. But I think those are the kind of people who really like this idea of like risk identification and mitigation, because it's like they need to know up front, here are all the things that can go wrong, here are all the things that we're going to do to make sure those things don't go wrong, and in the event that something new pops up, here's the process we will take. And so you'll learn that like for that buy-in piece that you were saying, like, oh, sometimes it'll help you with buy-in, it will with certain groups of people, especially because they're like, oh, well, good, we're not just blindly going into this thing. And
I will say, with data scientists, I love when they're involved in these convos because, to your point, they're always willing to participate in this risk assessment. And, the thing that you watch out for then as the program project manager person is that they don't get into analysis paralysis. So there is a line. But it's true. Like if you find those folks that want to dive in to do some of these things, it can actually help encourage maybe some of those others that aren't super into the risk assessment and just want to get going. Help shepherd them in, get their thoughts on the table too.
And to your point about analysis paralysis, one of the things I struggled with when I was, starting out as a PM is, how do you know that you have enough risks? Like, okay, I got 7. Is that enough? Is that not enough? Like, do I need more? Because I think there's an infinite amount of risks to anything. What if tomorrow we go out of business? Like, you can come up with literally a cajillion risks. And the goal of risk identification is not to say, I have 1 million risks. So now you get to a point, the goal of risk identification is to lend itself to like risk planning. Like, what do I do now that I know that these are risks? So if you have 1 million risks, like you can't adequately plan for all 1 million scenarios. So that's not the goal. And I love the fact you brought up that certain people can get into analysis paralysis, because what you're looking for to me is like are those medium and high risk, like the things that whatever risk scoring algorithm you're using, whatever will put things into the medium or high box, like those are things we want. If you're like, oh, well, what if we end up closing the office for a volunteer day over the course of this 2-year project and we're
Right.
off today? It's like, the likelihood that happens is probably high. Like we probably will have a team outing or something. Great. But like, what is the impact? Very minimal. So
Low,
you don't
right.
need to add that to the list. And so I think you're going to, that, as a piece of advice, as you're doing this, really don't try to think of like what's the smallest possible thing that can happen, unless that small thing is going to have a huge impact for some reason. You're really looking for what are things that pose a grave or risk to the successful completion of this project.
I did this pre-mortem, and actually somebody reached out to me about it recently to ask what it was called. But I did that, like, to your point, like, because the goal is to gather that list. Then you calculate that list out into, high impact, high likelihood, or, whatever, like you said, those medium and high ones. And we'll talk about a way to like kind of get those in the right buckets. But for the pre-mortem exercise to get like the juices flowing for folks, because like you said, you can call out risks for days and days and days, right? There is an impact day. We're going to be off work in 6 months. How's that going to impact the project, right? But you want to keep people focused really on getting to the end deliverable of whatever that is. Maybe there's milestone deliverables along the way, and you can look at those a little more in detail as you do this risk assessment. But for the pre-mortem, like exercise to get those risks kind of flowing, I like to do a little scene setting. And side note, this is off topic, but I'm preparing for a block party and we're doing an 80s movie theme, and my family chose Back to the Future. So this is what I did in the pre-mortem also. I was like, get in your time machine, get in your DeLorean, whatever time machine you like. Maybe you're a Doctor Who fan. Side note, is that time machines? I don't know. But either way.
Well, Doctor Who, the TARDIS is kind of a time dilation machine, so it is a time machine of sorts, and it's been going since the 80s, so I think that's a safe one.
Great. Okay, so get in your time machine, and whenever you like thought that this project would wrap up, maybe it's a year-long project, I want you to get in your time machine. I want you to picture, and I do things like play off the weather that would be outside. Let's say ours is 6 months or whatever. Like, oh, it's a cold, snowy day in Chicago. You've landed December 11th, 2024. And really like get people in that mind space, that head space of where they will be at when this thing wraps up. And like, you gotta like evoke that feeling. This is that buy-in. This is that change management, get the elephant to move kind of a thing. And so one of the things I did in that specific example, I just like had a bunch of open-ended questions, like what caused us to miss our end date, right? Because like that's such a big one. And a lot of times with development, dates move forward and backwards and sideways all the time. So I'm sure that is something people will feel very emotional about if you say, what made me miss our end date? And start capturing that list and the impacts of those things. And that is like your step one. Get that list. Don't worry about assigning it a high, medium, low until you actually have the list in front of you. Right. Get that thing on the paper.
Quick aside, this is a podcast of asides, I think. I think you learn a lot about people by the way they facilitate meetings and just the way they interact with teams. Because you're sitting here talking about this exercise you do, and you have this imagery of like you're in your car's a time machine. We're going back in the future. It's a sunny day, and I would never do any of this. It's like I literally was like, I would go in a meeting, I'd be like, hey, oh shucks, what was I gonna say? Oh,
You're just like direct. You're like, this is an important piece of work we got to get done.
Hey, what's the worst case scenario? You just like write that on this post, like we're getting fired. What happened here? And I'm like, I'm not giving you any imagery. It's just like, you tell me all the things that you think are gonna get us fired. Go. Believe it or not, those people are like, we use too much processing to run the model. I'm like, yeah, put it down. They're like, oh, the model gave incorrect answers. Put it down. Like we're just, whatever's gonna get fired, you put on that person. Like I am a oh, that's what I was gonna say. You were talking about like Back to the Future as a movie. I was like, I'm thinking of Doomsday Preppers. I am a huge fan of the show Doomsday Preppers. Not because I believe those people are doing the right thing, because I absolutely don't. I think half of those people are prepping for a doomsday that's like not even realistic. But that's what I'm doing on this exercise. I'm like, we are doomsday preppers. What are the scenarios in which we think the end of the world at your company is going to come to effect? So that's just a little bit
That's
about our personalities. Jackie
I
is very hopeful and optimistic for the future. I am like, the world's coming to an end. Let's pack up and go.
I actually appreciate it though, because that example, like, what's gonna get us fired? That, like, boom, hits an emotion, right? It
Yeah,
starts
because
with
even
a
people who don't want to participate, they can come up with some answers for that. They're like, oh, well, if you ask me that, and I'm like, yeah, great, go ahead,
yeah.
go.
All right. So now that we either have doomsday prepped or gone back in time or forward in time, gotta get back in time.
By the way, you talked about
Yeah,
Back to the Future. What era did Honey I Shrunk the Kids come out? Because like I love that show.
amazing question. It is also the 80s.
Yes, I would have chosen that one then.
My neighbors are going to do that, but I don't know what kind of props and things they're gonna make. It's gonna be super
It's
interesting.
actually super easy, dude, but make a lot of small things and then you'll be big.
And you'll be big. Yeah.
So easy.
So funny. So funny. All right. So now that we've done our prepping, whether it be doomsday or back to the future, and now we've got a list of risks. Let's say we just have like super simple 1 through, let's just say 10 for fun. We've identified 10 risks. Now, how do we calculate these? How do we weight them? There's different exercises you could do. And Thomas, I'm sure you're familiar with the one that I'm about to share, but I really love making a matrix assessment, doing a little activity with it. So each of those things would either be a Post-it or a sticky or a virtual sticky, however you do. And you just create 2 axes. Your one axis will be level of impact from low to high. The other axis could be likelihood of happening. Or you could even choose something difficult of, is this easy or difficult? Like to mitigate, if you want to do your mitigation plan, a little bit of planning. But I have found that once you get those things mapped out with a consensus from the group, then you're really easy to see which things are falling in the top risky box, right? The high impact and high likelihood type items. You could start making a plan from there. And how often do we make a mitigation plan up front? Like, I feel like it's always after the fact.
Um, um, I want to just say that sometimes, especially if you're doing a group exercise where you're trying to evaluate the likelihood and the impact, it's sometimes hard to get people to agree. And so what I've done, especially if I have a lot
True.
of them to get through, sometimes as a project manager, I'll take a stab at it. I'll say, this feels very, very likely to happen, right or wrong. And like,
Mm,
it's because sometimes if you're like, group, what do you think? Then everyone becomes a conversation. Well, because I had a conversation about this with Chris, and Chris said this, and then I talked to, and it's like, no, I'm not asking
Yeah.
you what you've already done. I'm just asking you, how medium low is this going to happen? And so sometimes, especially if you have a group that's moving too slow, I will start taking a stab out there. And it's okay if you have no clue what something means. Like this one, I don't get it all because it's super technical. I'm gonna say this feels very low likely to me, and it's like they're like, no, it's not. And like they will tell you, but don't feel like everything has to be, hey, let's collaborate with every single one, because sometimes that can take a long time if you have more
I
than
was going to
two.
say, yeah, if you've got a large group, that might not be the best approach. If you have a smaller group of leads, could be totally doable.
Yeah, for sure.
Or you could even do like a exercise where, I mean, this would probably work more in person than virtually, but like where people just get two, go up, pick 2, put them where they go, go up, pick 2, put
Yeah,
them where they go, and then you have that conversation afterwards, because the risk assessment it's like estimation.
yeah.
It's not
Does not
100%
need
known.
precision of any kind of.
Yeah, you're gonna get close enough to accurate to at least start thinking about these things. And I don't know. I think like risk assessments for me as like a project manager, it really helps me understand a lot of details about the project that I may not have understood on the onset as well. And it gives like me also like a map to navigate what to look out for. Like, oh, well, there's gonna be probably an avalanche if we go this route, but maybe just like a little snow shower or a tornado warning. How about tornado warnings in the Midwest? Jeez Louise, that's been a lot.
Oh, I don't know if I told you this morning, but so we had a tornado yesterday in my area. There was a
Yes.
tree on my neighbor's house. Did I tell you that this morning, Jackie?
No, you
Yes,
did
my
not.
immediate next door neighbor, there was a tree on her house. I didn't even realize for half the morning until I was like, what is all this noise? And it's the people who came and took the tree off her house.
Oh
So
my
yeah,
gosh. Is
and
everybody
that
all
was not on
right?
our risk. That was not on our neighborhood risk assessment. We did not have one of trees fall on your house on there.
Tornadoes and trees? Everyone's all right, I assume.
I think so. I haven't seen them this morning, but their
Yeah.
house looked pretty intact. It just looked like the tree fell on it, so that's
Oof.
so yeah, again, because risks are everywhere. We need to go around the house and look about, what if these gutters and downspouts are running into my house and the water flows in. Like there are lots of risks in
Well,
homeownership.
so I was gonna say the homeownership industry, like you're always thinking about risks as you're buying and selling homes. I'm certain. Like for me, we are fortunate we have a basement. But in the house that I grew up in, we did not have a basement. So when it was tornado time, you had to go into the most interior room of your house. And our choices were the closet under the stairs or the bathroom on the first floor. And to me, as a child, like that was kinda scary, right? Like, tornadoes are I mean, I don't know. I also am fascinated by weather, so it's, like, scary and not scary all at the same time. It's like I can't look away, but I have to go hide now, like, kind of a feeling. But I will say that as an adult, and now that I have purchased my own home, I am so happy I have a basement. It is so much easier to navigate my child to the basement versus like trying to keep him confined in a teeny tiny bathroom. Like I can only imagine how my parents were probably like, stay in there. And we're like, can we just look? Like, oh boy.
Irrational fears. I talked about my irrational fear of child abduction at the park. This is my other irrational. Well, this one I don't think is as irrational, but like basements are great in the sense of like you're likely to be safe there. Like if something happens to your house, you're likely to be safe in the basement based on how homes are constructed. Problem for me is like, what if you get trapped in the basement? Like, yes, the house collapses, but you're safe, but you're in the basement. But I was talking about this with somebody this morning because I had, it's such a rational fear that I talk about it often. And the person pointed out, it helped me remember, it's better to be alive and trapped where they can get you out than the opposite. And
I
so
yeah. Yes.
so we do have, for those listeners at home who need to, have never thought about this, we do have a lantern and emergency lighting down here. And I don't mean fancy like built into our house emergency light. Like we bought flashlights and other things that we rotate the batteries out of annually so that we always have lighting in our basement. We have an emergency food kit down here that lasts, I think, 6 days.
Good.
But it expires next year, so I have to eat all this food because I'm not I'm a thrifty person. I'm not gonna waste the money on it. So now I have to sit here and eat all this food next year if I don't use it by then.
We
And like
can
we have drinking water down here, like we have all these different things, so that like if we are ever trapped, it could take hours, it could take minutes, it could take days, depending on how like severe the devastation is.
yes.
Oh, but we're getting into like, oh man, this is a great segue actually, because it's like I identified a risk could be that I could get trapped in here. I did the assessment. I said the likelihood is low, but the impact is still super high, and so therefore it still makes sense that I plan what happens if this risk comes to fruition. And my mitigation strategy was I can't stop this from happening. I can't predict when a tornado will make my house be leveled and I'm trapped in the basement. There's nothing I can do to prevent the risk. So instead, I am going to say, what can I do to minimize the impact of the risk now that it happens? And that
Yes.
have all of the things that I will need to survive comfortably for as long as I possibly can before it's like, oh, well, now.
And
And
to like you owned that mitigation plan, number 1, so there's a very clear owner in that, and then you probably had a timeline to make sure you had everything in place as a homeowner so that you could feel that fear subside a bit because you had a mitigation plan, and I'm calling out the timeline and the ownership because that is part when you translate it back, when you're doing it for projects, you need to, like your plan is only so good as what you have down, but if no one's going to bring it forth, then it just looks like a pretty piece of paper.
absolutely. And I like it a little vocabulary because when we talk about now we're moving into the planning process of like what we do, there are a couple mitigation strategies, and they usually fall into 4 buckets. The first is avoidance. This is I have a risk and I don't want it to happen, so I'm going to do everything I can to avoid the risk ever happening. So that means I might change the planning of or the execution of this. So I'm building the house. A risk is I might need to pull permits. I find out that is true. Like I will have to pull permits if I do this. So to avoid this, I do a different type of renovation that doesn't require permits. I'm just going to avoid that whole thing. That's one
Yep.
category. And obviously I'm going to give you a general illustration of each of the categories, but there's a lot of nuances to each of these. There's risk transference. I realize I have to pull a permit. I don't want to do that. That's cumbersome. I don't want to fill out the paperwork. I don't have the money. I'm going to hire a construction company that is going to do all that for me. So I'm transferring that risk to them. Now they have to worry about permits and all that. I am out of the game.
That is
That's category
sideline.
two.
My favorite like desire to get a contractor is so they do that part. Like literally, that is high on my list of somebody else do it. Moving
No,
on.
I got a new fence built and they would not
Yeah.
get the permit. They were like staunchly against it. I was like very nervous.
What?
They didn't want to get it. That I was like, it must be hard, and it was actually very easy. So that was weird.
All right. Maybe I'll think that through. Take another try.
I don't know, but and I'm sure every kind of permit is different. This was just a fence permit. They were like, "Do you have a copy of your contract? Do you have a copy of your survey?" And I was like,
Yep.
"Yes and no." So then I had to go get a survey, which was $600 more. Then I was like, "Yes and yes." But I need the survey for the construction company anyway. Nevertheless, there is so far transference and avoidance. Number 3, acceptance. This is one that's really hard, and I find most people don't do well. It's like, there's a risk I need a permit. I am going to just keep going, and I'm going to accept the consequence. It's just like, whatever happens, happens. And this is one of the ones where I think the nuance is important because it doesn't always mean, I know I'm breaking the law, I'm just going to do it anyway. It's like, they may do other smaller things to reduce the likelihood, but they're just like, overall, I have to accept this is going to happen. And I think a better example is what I was talking about with the basement situation. I have to accept that there is a possibility that my house could fall down on top of my basement exit and I'm just trapped there. This isn't something I can transfer. I mean, transference in this situation will probably be like sell the house to someone else and then that's their problem. But the risk kind of still follows with me because when I go to the next house, it can happen in any house at all. So this is something I just have to accept. I have to accept the reality that this can happen. And then again, I can do other things to mitigate what happens once the risk comes to fruition. So that's accepting. And that's why it's harder.
This acceptance one is hard too, because I think this is the one where if you have like a big risk and you're still going to move forward with things, because you can choose to move forward with projects and you can with this known risk and just monitor it and watch it, like watching a storm. But if you don't communicate that accepted risk and you don't have buy-in from your stakeholder group, then if that risk does happen, that's just like, it's like what's the thing that falls down the side of the avalanche? An avalanche of...
And that's the problem with both acceptance and monitoring, which you just hit on, but that's the last one. Both of those two require you to have the buy-in of your leadership team. And the problem is, from my experience, most leadership teams will, what's the opposite of overt?
Covert? Overt?
That doesn't have the right context. I don't know. Like they will accept it, quote unquote, but like they will never write an email and say like, yes, we as a company are going to allow you to do this thing that's not like technically sound or feasible. Like most of the time you can't get them to actually sign off on it, even if you've like verbally told them. And I think that's the challenge. It's like, well, but I don't want this to come back as like a Thomas LeNoir decision. Like I need you, Mr. Manager, Mrs. Manager, to say that's fine. And it's like, well, let's just proceed and see. And it's like, no. I want you to say out of your mouth that you understand that this is a risk. You understand that there is real consequences, and we are okay to continue to move forward. And it's like, okay, well, let's just continue to assess whether or not we need. It's like, no, I don't want you to use that kind of risk.
We already assessed it, and this is what we've just what the decision is. As long as you're good with it, like it's almost like you need, without adding process, but like a sign off or that like solid understanding, and also communicate it in writing, maybe multiple times, because And also, side note, I started second guessing covert as the opposite of overt, and I just did a little Google, and covert is the opposite of overt, where overt is like very obvious and straightforward. Covert is very hidden and vague.
Yes, it's just covert man. You think of like a spy, and I was like, I don't know about that. It was like I don't want to be like sneaking around, but yeah, it was the right word. It just didn't give me the oomph that
The
I
same
wanted.
feel. Yeah, you
Yeah.
gotta get the right feels going.
So, and then just even though we talked about it, just to say it plainly, risk monitoring is the last one, which is like we know this is a risk. We're not saying we're accepting it per se, but we want to continue to monitor. And when it seems more likely to happen, or it's we are starting to see signs of this, we will come back and we will likely find another mitigation strategy. Because it might be something that's like high um high impact, low to medium likelihood. It's like there are things we can do to mitigate against it, but they are costly. And so
Right.
we don't want to yet pull the trigger on buying a whole new data center so that we have redundancy if we notice that we don't need it. But we also don't want to not have it either. So it's like we may have a secondary plan. We're going to monitor it. And when we start seeing signs of trouble, and it's usually there's a threshold. It's like, and when this thing happens, which is well before the full blown impact, when we start seeing this kind of behavior, we will
Yeah.
come back and make a final decision.
It's almost
So it's
like identifying what your data points are or your key indicators are that's gonna lead you to do this new, like, it's almost like changing your critical path to something different because that risk is just too great. But like they say, no risk, no reward. Like sometimes there is value to taking that risk because maybe that risk doesn't play out and now you've gotten things done exceptionally fast. Or, I like risk is so fun because it like really, to me at least, it resonates with me like with the weather, right? There is a 50% chance of rain. However, it is supposed to be sunny and 85, and we had plans to go to the beach. And even though it's 50% chance of rain, it might not. So, like, do I still bring my family to the beach? That's like the assessment I have to do. And you know what? Sometimes when you go and there's a chance of rain, maybe a lot of other people don't go to the beach because they don't want to go to the beach. And now you're at the beach and you've got all the space in the world, and then it doesn't rain, and now you have the best beach day. Like,
let's talk about that actually, because now you said two things that are complementary that I want to bring together. You said no risk, no reward.
yes.
It's not 100% true, but that's a good rule of thumb. No risk, no reward. And then you talked about how in this beach scenario, sometimes when you go to the beach, there will be more room, more premium spaces, etc. And because people were fearful to go there because they knew that there was a risk it could rain. I think when we also applies to the business space, especially innovation, because I've worked in a number of departments where innovation was a struggle. And I remember we would come up with these big, bold ideas and like, oh, there are privacy risks for that. So we shouldn't dabble in that. Or like none of our competitors are doing that either, which must mean it's like not a good space or not enough information is known or like all of these risks. I would never say disregard the risk, but in a lot of cases, the reason why you're seeing stagnant growth in your industry or with your product line is because you are taking the safer bets where the risks are lower. And so no risk, no high reward. Sometimes you have to go into those areas where you put together a project plan, your project manager comes back and has done a risk assessment. They're like, there are 43 critical risks that could happen here. And
Mm-hmm.
you just have to be like, okay, we need to sit down and have a really good mitigation strategy for at least 90% of these.
Right.
But this doesn't scare us. We are as long as we can get the mitigation strategy that we feel comfortable with, we're going to proceed. Because the likelihood that like if you do proceed, you'll be the first in that space. You'll be the only one in the space for a long time, so you can capture a lot of that market share. You can capture a lot of the attention of folks who have that problem that needs solving.
And honestly, having mitigation plans in place help you to be more risk adverse if that's if that's where you're at, right? If you want to try something, but you are feeling this aversion to taking these big, bold risks, by doing that assessment and knowing what your fallback plans are or your rollback plans or your pivots, it does help so that you don't go down that road too far
Mm-hmm.
for too long. And it gives you it almost gives you more freedom in trying new things, I think. But again, that's that buy-in you have to get up front. Why do I want to do a risk assessment? I just want to dive in and do the work. Aha, here's another reason why it's a good idea to spend 1 hour with me, or whatever that is to get these things kind of mapped out.
Absolutely.
Ah, amazing. I was trying to think about, I feel like we kind of covered it, but like one thing that I was thinking about risk when we were like way back in the beginning talking about our children at the park. I don't know how this translates into business yet because I haven't gotten there yet. But one thing that, happens when you're raising young humans is that they need to participate in what's called risky play. It helps them with balance. It helps them with knowing boundaries and limits. It helps them learn how to interact with other children. And that anxiety, I guess maybe it brings it back to this anxiety thing. As a parent, how many times do you say, be careful or don't do that? And like, that's your anxiety while your child's actively doing risky play. I'll give you an example. I have concrete steps in the front of my house and I have railings on each side. And my child likes to climb on the outside of the railings to go up the steps. And he's done this for a very long time. When he first started doing it, I would let him know, like, I'm going to just stand behind you. And I like try my best not to say be careful because I want be careful to mean something when it slips out in a really dangerous situation. But I'll say things like, oh, just notice where your feet are. Are they on the step before you let go of the handle to go up one more? Notice, how do you feel? Do you feel balanced or do you feel off balance? What muscle groups are you using? Things like that. And I know that is my anxiety of like, I don't want this horror, like I don't want him to fall and like, hurt himself or anything like that. But I guess maybe the way it translates back into the business is by having this kind of like anxiety as a project manager for wanting this thing to be successful, like you got to be passionate about wanting to find out all those areas where it could go wrong and almost give good coaching and good guidance to get your team to the top of that steps, even if it's risky, but like you're there to be supportive in a safe way. And now my son will go up and down and like try to flip over the things. And I'm just like, yeah, he's got it because he's got it. Like, I know that he's done this so many times, it's second nature to him. I don't have to stand there. And I know if he's going to slip, he's going to say something or he's going to grab onto, the railing or whatever it is. So that's my story about risky play in risky
But
business.
I think risky play translates also into how you interact with your teams because we spend most of the time today talking about high impact or high likelihood risks. But what about those things that are like low impact, like maybe high likelihood, low impact? I think those are the areas where you give your team ability to do risky play, where it's like, even if this goes super sideways, the impact to the project is still low. Like you're gonna get frustrated. There may be some rework involved, but like it's not gonna break anything. It's not gonna totally blow the timelines or anything like that. Like I think that's where you give your team the ability to do a little risky play because it helps them to build autonomy, and it helps them to create boundaries for themselves, so they know going forward in the future, this is how we engage this, or this is when we bring Thomas or our project manager in because even though it seems like it's not a big deal to us, it turns out it could be, and so we want them to be aware. And so you may spot something with your eyes and still let them do what you think is not necessarily the best decision because you don't want them to feel like they're in a situation where they don't have the autonomy or the control to make decisions, even if they're not the right ones. Same with direct reports. Sometimes you have to let your direct reports do things that are not maybe the way you would do them or the way you think they should be done. And also, it can work in reverse where it surprises you and you're like, oh, wow, that actually worked. And you had a little confidence. And so it helps them still trust the other way around. And from the team to the project manager, that like you not only can you trust us, but we can now trust that you will support us sometimes when we want to deviate from the path.
Absolutely. See, I knew risky play felt like it worked in somewhere. I knew it. I just couldn't figure it out. Thank you, Thomas.
That's what I'm here for, to help you figure it out. I wish you could help me figure out what I wanted to say 5 minutes ago because I don't remember.
Uh-oh. I see I stopped practicing being a psychic because you told me it wasn't on my resume.
You didn't make any money from that. You were still predicting this stuff.
Oh, man. And I guess to round out that point too is like, like you were saying, like the risky play in business, it gives us as project folks to like, gives us like that opportunity to also support the team. So let's say they went off and did something and it was a high risk, low impact. And let's say it worked out in the worst way. And what we can do to support them, even though they like essentially may have failed, is we say, hey, our team tried something. It was amazing. It didn't work out, but here's what we learned, right? Like just encouraging that autonomy too, and like showing the folks that have a stake in your project that this is okay behavior. This is actually amazing for us. And this is how we're going to support our team going forward.
The one thing I want to make sure we talk about before we wrap up the call is the fact that I would say 95% of okay to good project managers, program managers, portfolio managers, and leaders are going to do all the things we just talked about. They're going to identify risks, they're going to assess the risk, and they're going to plan around. I would say 90. I'm giving it a high number. 95% of people are going to do that because that's what they teach in the textbook. Like that is project manager 101.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't stress in the textbook, and where I think 45% of those people fall off, and then we only have a pool of 50% of good people, is on the ongoing upkeep. Some risks eventually fall off. Like if we're like, hey, there's a risk that we don't have the technical capabilities in-house to build this. Once you start building it, you may say, oh, well, we do actually. We didn't realize that all these people in this other team that their project just wrapped up knows Java and they can now do it. Like that's not a risk anymore. Like that is past, that's gone. That comes off the list. The list is ever growing, ever evolving. And like that's why I think we lose people. We did the step up front. Any other risks that we identify early on are fully mitigated. If something happens, we got it. Anything that comes up new is like a curveball out of the blue. It's like, whoa, we didn't realize that. Oh my God. Like if you started this project a year ago and you had estimates on cost throughout, the duration of the project because it's a 2-year engagement, you release it incrementally, hopefully, but like the full project cost we thought was this. If you're not reassessing that at least on an annual basis, you're going to figure out that, especially in today's economy where there's hyperinflation, this is going to cost a lot more because the cost of labor has increased, the cost of goods have increased, all these things have increased. Like that's a risk that you have to assess as the project is going. It's like there are all these things I think we miss because we don't keep checking in with ourselves. And this should not be, in my opinion, I'll see what Jackie's thoughts are, but in my opinion, this is not a one-off or individual activity. It's like if this is a year-long project, once a quarter, I'm literally bringing everybody back together, and we're probably doing some kind of general check-in meeting anyway to just say, hey, one quarter's gone by, where are we? But as a part of that meeting, I am bringing up the risk slide, say, hey, folks, I just want to show that we've taken a couple things off. We celebrate, and I'm saying, oh, but there are a couple new things that folks have emailed or Slacked me about throughout the course of this quarter that I have been tracking. And I put it together on here because I think we do need to talk about a couple of these. I want to make sure we're all aligned on this because if we want to make a change in direction now, we can, but that has impacts to other things on the project timeline. And so I want to make sure that we've discussed it. And that's where I think we miss people. People don't often continue to revisit this in a meaningful way.
I do not disagree with you. The words I wrote down as I was listening to you was ongoing upkeep, continuous communication, and some kind of regularly cadenced check-in or retro as the project goes on. And so that's a big part of it too. And I think you're right. If it's not something that is continually looked at or communicated, then it does fall off, or you don't capture the new things. And so I would agree. And I like the idea of at whatever the cadence is that makes sense. I love a retrospective for all of these reasons because a lot of them pop up there. But as long as like, I don't know, I just see myself, like for me, I see myself having, a standardized template that I can share with my stakeholder group via the communication mode that makes the most sense. A lot of times it's email, but it could be something different. And in there, I would usually keep like, these are the top risks we're monitoring, like. And then I really love when a risk is no longer a risk, taking that time to like kind of do like a hooray, it's not a risk anymore, right? Like give that positive momentum we got rid of this risk, or we decreased this risk, or this risk naturally went away. However, it went away. Like, there is value to like pushing momentum that way. And so I agree with you, Thomas. The really, really good ones will continue to keep an eye and push it forward.
What else?
I don't know. That's a great, powerful question to ask.
And that's the question you're asking when you're talking about risks. What else?
What else? That's one of my faves.
And I would really watch people, even if you're virtual and you have people on camera, I would really watch people's expressions, because I have asked what else before, and someone has like slightly shrugged their eyebrows, and I was like, Jim, I noticed you're my favorite person.
Jim is here.
Yeah, I noticed you had like a slight reaction to that. And he'll say, no, it was really nothing. It wasn't a big deal. And I'm like, okay, not a problem. It's not a big deal. Let's just hear it.
Right?
You'll be surprised at how many of those not a big deal things, maybe they didn't feel highly likely to happen, but like had huge impact, and B, how many actually did happen.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
I'm like, well, let's just put on a sticky anyway. Let's just have it. Worst case scenario, we wasted the sticky, and they put it on there, and we start talking about it, and we come up with a plan, and sure enough, this thing happens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why, what else? There's always something in the back of people's mind that they're just so uncomfortable with saying, or they're nervous they're gonna jinx, or whatever.
It doesn't apply in that moment, and it's like, no, this is the moment. I know it seems far down the road, but get it out right now.
Yeah, so like I didn't do that on purpose, but that is a powerful question. It's like, what else? Because somebody's gonna have something, and it's actually gonna be really important.
Agreed. Are you doing wrap up today?
I don't know. Today I have 5 bullet points. All of them have words next to it. So no more than this risky business of saying I have 3, but only really having 2. I have a couple sub bullets. So I will give it a go.
Give it a go. I know you can do this.
Here we go, Transformers. So today we talked about risky business. All risk, no reward, or maybe all reward, no risk. Hopefully that one. We're talking about just the process of risk identification. How do we go about figuring out what is a risk? And we heard Jackie's lovely example of talking about the time machine, going back in time, and what were the things that we could have prevented, and my more utilitarian version of like, what's going to get us fired here? Let's put all those things on paper. Regardless of what your style is, the goal is not only for you to think about what are the things that are impacting your project, but to get a wider audience of people who are all intimately involved from at different levels of the organization on this project, to say, what are all the things that we need to be thinking about? And believe it or not, this risk identification is also not only cathartic, it gets out of you, but it helps to reduce anxiety for a lot of folks. We talked about me and my anxiety around child abductions and or being involved in a catastrophic tornado that leaves me trapped in my basement. But it helps. It helps because once you know that that's what's in the back of people's minds, it's no longer the elephant in the room anymore in conversations. It's no longer that thing that's weighing people down. It's out in the open, and so people can move on. You can get their buy-in because they now know that you are actively working to make sure that those things that keep them up at night don't happen. And you might even make some best friends. The data scientists of the world will love you for this. So, identify the risks. Also talk about, what do those risks mean to people? And how are they keeping them up at night? We talked about, once we have identified the risks, we've talked about what they are, doing some level of scoring, making sure that we understand what's the likelihood that this happens to you. And if it does happen, what will that mean? Is it really likely to happen and going to totally bomb the project, at which point we want to really have a solid strategy around it? Or is it something that's like unlikely to happen? Even if it does happen, it's a minor inconvenience. We got to send an extra email. And so Jackie talked about some exercises you can do with that. Like she said, we often do like a 4 quadrants kind of thing, where we have low to high likelihood, low to high impact, and we really look for what those things are: high impact, high likelihood, and then we kind of work around the other quadrants, and we rarely ever talk about things that are low impact, low likelihood. We also talked about, now that we have that, what comes next, and that's the categorization. Is this something we want to avoid? We can transfer to someone else. We're just going to accept, or we need to monitor for the time being. And each of those has different options in terms of how you actually make those come to life. but it's about knowing not only what the risks are, but what we're going to do now that we know. And we talk about the fact that the higher the risk, typically the higher the reward. That even applies to some innovation activities or how we develop software tools, approaches, etc. And so don't be afraid that just because you did a risk assessment and comes up with a lot of stuff, that it still may be the best path for the organization or for you. And the last thing I wrote down is it requires continuous upkeep. This is not a one and done activity. It's not an exercise you do once a year. It's something that you have to continually monitor because regardless of the likelihood when you first identified it, the world's constantly changing. Things are evolving, laws are changing. And so something that was maybe medium likelihood, but low impact today could be medium likelihood and high impact tomorrow. And so you want to make sure you continue to think about those things. I guarantee that I missed something because that was only 5 bullet points. We've been talking for 15 minutes. What else did you write down, Jackie?
The only additions that I wrote down are if you are feeling risk averse, mitigation planning can be your best friend to help you feel better about any risky moves you'd like to make. And then the last thing would be interacting with teams, like figuring out what things that they can own as risky play and like move it forward, move the needle forward. And even if it's a scenario where it becomes a learning situation, as a program manager, project manager, portfolio manager, you step in and show your support as best you can because the team is the one driving the driving force and they deserve your support.
Oh, that's so sweet. You're being a sentimental one today. That brings us down to the end of the road. We've eased on down the road all the way to the end of the show. So until next week, Transformers, keep on doing the great work that you do. Know that your work is valued and appreciated, and in some cases is life-changing because you have saved the day because you identified the risk.
Yeah.
Until next week, I'll talk to you later, Transformers. Take care.
Bye.
Dun, dun, dun.